But we found there's a strong connection.
I would rather deal with organized crime than disorganized crime. Because in disorganized crime, everybody's out there doing whatever they wanted to do. In organized crime, only certain people can do it.
Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of Corruption Connection. This episode is actually a continuance of a previous episode I've done titled Mafia Drug Dealers Control Prison. I'll post a link for it in the title below. However, I needed some help with part 2. So today I have with me world-renowned author of Hitman, Mafia, Drugs, and the East Harlem Purple Gang, Scott Dietche. Scott, welcome into Corruption Connection.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming in, definitely. So during my research, I kind of hit a little snag. I went through the beginning of the list, and on the fourth man of the list is a guy who I think you might be very familiar with. His name is Joseph Dellavalle.
Yeah.
Now, I couldn't really find much information about him aside from what was written in your book.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what you know about him and if you've ever heard about his involvement in the corruption in Greenhaven prison back in the 80s.
So, Joe Dellavalle and his brother John Dellavalle grew up in East Harlem. They both kind of get involved in like stick-ups, robberies in the mid-1960s. In fact, John has an arrest from that time period for robbery. By the early 70s, the Dellavalles fall in with members of the East Harlem Purple Gang, which is this group of young, kind of upstart mob associates. They're basically like a big youth gang, but these guys in their early 20s.
Right.
And they get heavily involved in narcotics because of earlier busts on Pleasant Avenue the year prior, kind of took out the large leadership of mafia-run drug dealers in the neighborhood. So there was a little bit of a vacuum, and the Purple Gang stepped in. So anyway, so the Dellavalles are intimately associated with the Purple Gang. Now, in July of 1972, Joe Dellavalle is walking with a couple Purple Gang associates, the Manfredis. There's Big Phil and Little Phil, they're cousins. They're walking to the historic Drake Hotel in Manhattan, and there's a bachelor party coming out of the hotel. It's kind of lost to time what happens, but an argument ensues between the two groups. And a member of the bachelor party, the groom, actually turns to walk towards Joe Dellavalle. Joe pulls out a gun, shoots him 3 times in the head. The other member of the bachelor party is an off-duty family court cop, and he pulls his gun and shoots Joe Dellavalle in the hip. Now, with that, the Manfredi brothers run, the Manfredi cousins run. They leave the scene. So the police come. Joe's arrested, charged with murder, assault. I think there were 2 or 3 charges on there.
Right.
But he's taken to the hospital, obviously. Now, his brother John hears about this, and he's furious at the Manfredis. Well, a month later, Big Phil and Little Phil are at a family gathering with some of their relatives, including their uncle Jojo Manfredi, who's pretty powerful in the Gambino crime
And the
family.
Manfredis were Gambinos, right?
Yeah. So the Manfredi cousins leave to go to this meeting and in the Bronx, and the cops find their body the next morning. Both of them were shot. Somebody they let to the car started shooting them. So suspicion obviously fell to John Dellavalle, but police were never able to come up with enough evidence to charge him. But the postscript of that is, in March of 1974, about 2 years after he allegedly kills the Manfredis, there's a guy going for a hike in the woods about 2 hours north of New York City and finds a shallow grave. And when police dig it up, they find the body of John Dellavalle. And not soon after that, Joe is convicted and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison.
Right. I think that's where the report picks up, because it states something about him getting shot.
Joseph Dellavalle, previously convicted of narcotics possession, shot 2 of his associates during an argument, killing one of them. He was in turn shot several times by an off-duty police officer and suffered a permanent hip injury. While on bail following hospitalization, he was again arrested for shooting a man during an argument. On convictions of manslaughter in the 1st degree and assault in the 2nd degree, he was sentenced to terms from 6 to 18 years and 4 years, respectively, to be served concurrently. Dellavalle entered the prison system on May 13, 1976, and on July 10, 1976, was transferred to Greenhaven. He is currently an inmate at Wallkill Correctional Facility and will be eligible for parole on January 24th, 1982. The maximum expiration date on his prison term is January 24th, 1984. On Saturday, March 3rd, 1977, Dellavalle left Greenhaven at approximately 7:30 a.m. escorted by officers McGivney and Close to attend his mother's funeral at the Castle Hill Funeral Home in the Bronx. At the funeral home, they met a fellow correctional officer, a friend of Dellavalle's family, who reportedly persuaded the two officers to leave Dellavalle on his own. In return, Dellavalle sent the officers to a prostitute on the east side of Manhattan. The officers, however, were unable to find the woman and returned to retrieve Dellavalle at his family's home. At the Dellavalle residence, they were refused admittance for approximately 90 minutes and were forced to wait in the hallway. After stopping to eat with Dellavalle, the three returned to Greenhaven, arriving only 11 hours later at approximately 7:10 p.m. The officers were paid for their trouble, but were unhappy with the day's receipts.
Did he walk with like a hip impairment for the rest of his
Yeah,
life?
I think he was pretty. You know, it was an injury in the hip for sure.
Yeah. So did he ever become a made guy or no?
Not that I found out, and I honestly kind of lost a little track of when went prison. I heard a little bit about the Greenhaven thing, but after that, you know, I know he gets back out, and still tangentially, you'll see his name like associated here and there with some of the surviving Purple Gang members.
Are there any more surviving Purple Gang members right now?
Matty, Madonna.
Right. So he's in jail for life or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he had a shot in 2012, right? I think it's when he went back to jail.
Yeah, well, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. From the Genovese family, Danny Leo, he was a Purple Gang member, and he's still around. So it's funny, the guys that are still around for the most part have become made members.
They gravitated towards a family.
Yeah,
Actually got picked
yeah.
up.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this video, please click the like button below and make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you would like to support the channel further, please hit the super thanks icon, which can be found below each video or in the comment section below. If anyone is interested in becoming a connected member, click the join button to gain access to rare pictures of organized crime figures, untold stories, and exclusive behind the scenes footage. Thank you. Now let's get back to Corruption Connection.
So when did the Purple Gang actually dissolve? I mean, I know Meldish got killed in 2013, I believe, but
Yeah, but
a little bit before that,
I would say by the late 70s or by the early 80s, some of the guys from the Purple Gang start becoming made members. Like Angelo Prisco, for example, becomes a made member. Danny Leo becomes a made member. Mostly Genovese and Lucchese, the couple Bonanno guys. Obviously, I mentioned Mancuso, went to the Bonanno family. You don't see many Gambinos or Colombos out of Purple Gang. It was really kind of very heavily Genovese because of being up in East Harlem.
Geography of the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
It was,
So
Lucchese, Genovese territory.
I would have given the gang probably about 10 years of being a gang. Now there were some guys that were still all worked together, like Frank Vicerto Jr. and the Cayenos, even started working together in through the 1980s and Meldish into the 90s.
What year did Joey Meldish go away?
Oh, you're
I'm testing Scott's knowledge right now. I'm putting him to the test, guys.
It was before his brother was killed. I want to say around 2009-ish.
Yeah, a lot of people say Joey was still on the street that his brother killed that way.
Yeah, it definitely was before Michael was killed in 2013.
Yeah, what's interesting, you had mentioned the Priscos and Matty Madonna, is that we're very familiar now with Angelo Prisco. I know he's pretty popular. He passed away recently, the Genovese guy. And Matty Madonna, who we just said is a former boss of the Lucchese crime family. But both of those guys actually, their brothers or early family members started in organized crime. We think of them as huge names that made their way, but Matty Madonna's brother, Frank, was actually a huge heroin trafficker before Matty was probably even born. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, which was really fascinating to find out myself, And Angelo Prisco, I came across an individual by the name of Aiello Prisco, who was murdered in East Harlem. And I'm guessing, some tie into the Prisco family.
And his brother, Pasquale Prisco, was involved. And, the Priscos and the Meldishes are related.
They're cousins, right?
Yeah, cousins. So that's another thing about the Purple Gang, which that was interesting, is there were a lot of familial and neighborhood connections with the guys. So they were kind of a tight group.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a storied area, Italian Harlem. It's not there anymore, as like a lot of people know. If they go to East Harlem, it's no longer East Harlem. Of the back in the day, I should say. It's no longer the East Harlem that it once was. However, that stretch of Pleasant Avenue from 114 to 120th was probably the heroin capital of America at one point.
Yeah, I have a quote in my book, something to that effect, where it was like, "This is the epicenter of the American heroin traffic." It's not a big block,
It's not at all.
It's like this little stretch of a street here, and that was where those guys were all operating out of. And what's interesting is that had been going on for a couple decades. It wasn't just like it kind of started tapering off in the 70s because law enforcement started really cracking down more.
Right.
That was always a big area for narcotics trafficking, and of course, yet another thing, dispelling the notion that the mafia were never involved in
Yeah, exactly. That's a myth. I think everybody knows that. They were involved at, I do not think that they were involved on a retail level, let's say, but as far as like the importation of drugs, the mafia controlled it. I mean, they could say whatever they want. As far as Gambino putting that rule in, it was hypocritical because supposedly, I don't know if I was able to find anything that actually tied the link, but it's a well-known fact that Tommy Eberle was making a deal on behalf of Carlo Gambino. It was actually Gambino's money. That's why he got killed. Yeah. So, I mean, that area in general, like you said, is the Mecca or the epicenter since the 50s.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the precursor to the Purple Gang was they picked up, I guess, from the old French Connection.
So guys that were kind of, you had the French Connection in the early 1960s. There's still French traffickers working with like Carmine Galante and some other mobsters. But then there's other stuff now coming out of Southeast Asia, especially as the Vietnam War starts ramping up. And you see guys not only in New York, but guys, and I'll shout out to Tampa, Santo Trafficante from Tampa. He's making visits to Southeast Asia during the height of the Vietnam War.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, so you get that pipeline starts coming in, and it's really heroin now. There are some guys in the Purple Gang like Frank Vicerdo Jr. who get involved in cocaine, but the mob really went in more on heroin, and then obviously cocaine at that time starts being
The drug of choice.
the drug of choice, and then you already have the Colombians and Cubans who control them. So the mob were never able to really get into cocaine the way they were to heroin, for sure.
That's interesting. I think that plays a lot into it at as far as the importation level, having a Southeastern Asian connect. I mean, that's where the poppy's grown. Then to actually, establish that direct link. However, you said that this got I'm sorry, what was his name?
Vicerdo.
It was his connection in South America in order to import the cocaine, or
I'm
what?
not sure where, but
Seems a little different than the normal.
Yeah, so I think that's right in the time. This is like the late 70s. I think 77 is when he gets indicted on drug charges. So that's when you start seeing cocaine start coming more into the picture. So I think, it was probably a matter of, hey, this new thing that's getting more popular, let's try to jump on that.
Did Trafficante, before he went to Southeast Asia, just diverting off topic because you brought it up, did he have connections through Mexico at that point? Because he was right there in Tampa on the Gulf of Mexico, I guess?
No, he has some connections in Costa Rica because he visits there. And then one of his lieutenants, Dominic Furci, his son was operating in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, and that was that connection there. But yeah, Trafficante did have a little bit more connections in Central America than some of the other mafia guys.
Yeah, just geographic.
Exactly, yeah, geographic proximity.
No, it's just interesting stuff for sure. I really appreciate you coming here and having this discussion.
Absolutely.
I want to thank Scott for coming and sharing this time and actually helping me out and completing this episode. Like I said, there was nobody else that really could help me. This is the guy who knows what he's talking about, and I really appreciate it. So thanks, Scott.
Absolutely. So.
Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Tony Handsome, and this is Corruption Connection.